It was 7:42 on a gray Thursday morning when I saw him, a man in a navy coat, standing by the old iron bridge that cuts through the industrial part of town. He kept looking over his shoulder, glancing up the road as if he was expecting someone, or running from them. I was parked across the street, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup, half awake, when he dragged a black suitcase out of his trunk. He hesitated for a few seconds, then threw it hard into the river. The splash was louder than it should have been. He stood there just long enough to watch it sink, then drove off like nothing happened. I don't know what made me move, maybe curiosity, maybe something worse, but I followed the current downstream. 10 minutes later, the suitcase bumped against the rocks near the bank. I pulled it out, soaked and heavy, the lock broken from the impact. When I opened it, I didn't find money or drugs, just files, dozens of them, stamped with seals I'd never seen before. Some were marked confidential property of the Department of Finance. Others had names, mine included. And that's when I realized I hadn't just found a stranger's secret. I'd just stepped into a crime that had been waiting for me all along. The first file I opened was already falling apart from the water, but the ink was still legible. It wasn't just random papers. It was a list of accounts, shell companies, signatures, a web of transactions that seemed to stretch across multiple countries. But one name kept repeating itself in bold black ink: Arthur D. Crane, the name of my old employer, a man I hadn't worked for in over 5 years. The same man who had built half the city's construction empire on federal contracts and green initiatives. I'd been his financial analyst for 3 years, until I quit after discovering some discrepancies in the ledger's numbers that didn't match. Invoices without suppliers, payments without recipients. He'd told me I was mistaken. Then, a week later, my access to the company system was revoked. No explanation, no severance, just silence. That morning by the river, staring at those soaked folders, it was as if the past had drifted back to me. Every file inside that suitcase was connected to the same offshore fund I'd once questioned. But this time there was something new, my own digital signature on several of the forms, forged but convincing enough to ruin me. My name was tied to accounts I'd never opened, transfers I'd never approved. And if these papers were real, I was the fall guy for a money trail that spanned millions. I remember standing there in the drizzle, holding those ruined pages, hearing the sound of cars passing above the bridge. I should have thrown the suitcase back in. I should have walked away. Instead, I took it home. I spread the documents out across my kitchen table, using paper towels to dry each page, scanning every word. There were payment orders, internal memos, audit drafts, things no civilian should have. Some were addressed to a senator's office, others to a name I didn't recognize then: Thomas Brand, Chief of Financial Oversight for the city. And in the bottom corner of one envelope, in faint pencil handwriting, were 2 words: "If found, deliver to AB." Whoever AB was, they were clearly someone inside the system, maybe even trying to expose it. But I wasn't thinking about whistleblowers. I was thinking about what this meant for me. My signature, my initials, my former employer, and millions in unaccounted funds. It would take one journalist or investigator to tie it all back to me. I'd be done, career, reputation, everything. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, my phone buzzed at 6:03 a.m., an unknown number. A man's voice, calm, polite. "Mr. Hale, we need to speak about something that belongs to you." He didn't say who he was, didn't ask if I'd found anything. Just something that belongs to you. My blood froze. I asked who was calling. He said, "Someone who'd rather not involve the police yet." Click. Silence. That was when I noticed the same black sedan parked across the street from my apartment building. It had been there since dawn. I thought maybe I was overreacting, until I saw the same car again at the grocery store later that day, and then outside my office parking lot the next morning. By day 3, I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was being watched. So I did what any rational man would do. I made copies of every page, sealed the originals in a waterproof bag, and stored them inside my neighbor's basement freezer. Then I called a friend from my old job, someone I trusted, Evan, a senior accountant who'd left the firm the same year I did. When I told him about the suitcase, his voice cracked through the line. "You need to get rid of it. Right now. Do not read further." But it was too late. I'd already seen enough to understand what was happening. These weren't just fake ledgers. They were the evidence of a laundering chain that used municipal projects as its front. Payments funneled through environmental grants and community redevelopment. The fake accounts used names of former employees, people like me who had left before the scheme went public. The more I read, the clearer it became. I wasn't just a bystander. I was the scapegoat waiting on file. Evan met me that evening at a cafe outside town. He looked thinner, older, and when I handed him a few pages, his hands shook. "Where did you get these?" he asked. I told him about the man on the bridge. He said nothing for a long while, just stared at the rain. Then he whispered, "Arthur's brother is running for governor next year. If this comes out, they'll burn everything and everyone connected." He folded the papers back up and slid them to me. "Don't ever contact me again." That night I found a note under my windshield. No name, no threat, just 5 words in block letters. "You were never supposed to see." The next morning, my apartment door was ajar. No signs of forced entry, but my laptop and external drives were gone. I knew what that meant. Someone had already copied my data. I went to the police, but when I tried to explain, the officer looked skeptical. "You're saying you found classified financial documents in a river?" His tone was half disbelief, half annoyance. "And you decided to take them home?" "They took a statement but didn't file a report." "We'll note it down," he said, which meant nothing will happen. That's when I decided to document everything myself. I photographed each page, time-stamped every call, every license plate I saw. I started writing a log-me-own record of what I'd seen, who I'd talked to, and what was happening. 2 weeks later, my employer's name appeared in the news again. Former Crane Associates employee under federal review for financial misconduct. They used my name, my photo, my old ID picture from the company website. I was officially the story now. My phone started ringing, non-stop journalists, creditors, people I hadn't heard from in years. My landlord got a call advising him to evict me. My bank account was frozen under pending investigation. And every night the same car idled outside until 3 a.m. By the time the first subpoena arrived, I already knew how this would end. The man on the bridge hadn't been getting rid of evidence. He'd been transferring it deliberately. I was meant to find it. Someone needed a name to pin the blame on, and mine was the easiest. But they'd underestimated one thing. I wasn't planning to disappear quietly. I stopped sleeping altogether. My apartment turned into an archive walls lined with corkboards. Every sheet from the suitcase pinned up with thumbtacks and red string. I documented everything, every discrepancy, every forged signature. I built a timeline starting with my resignation date and ending with the man on the bridge. At 4:27 one morning, while going over the same batch of invoices for the 3rd time, I spotted it. A hidden note embedded in the footer of one PDF. A series of numbers and a single phrase. "Not all rivers flow one way." When I cross-checked the numbers against the routing data in the ledgers, they matched bank accounts opened under a name I hadn't noticed before. Alistair B. The same initials I'd seen on the envelope. AB. He wasn't some random courier. He was part of the system. I started to see the pattern. Each transfer ended in the same offshore trust in Belize. Each signature belonged to someone who'd left the company years ago. And each environmental grant was tied to a contract signed by Arthur Crane's brother, now the front-runner in the governor's race. The deeper I went, the more the walls closed in. I'd wake up to knocks on the door that stopped before I could answer. My mailbox was pried open twice. My employer's lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter accusing me of defamation on a story I hadn't even told yet. One night, coming back from a grocery run, I saw my apartment door slightly open again. This time the suitcase was gone. Only the paper towels I'd used to dry it were left, damp and smelling of river water. But I wasn't completely unprepared. I'd hidden a full scan of the contents on an encrypted drive stored in a locker under a false name. And now I had leverage. But leverage only works if someone knows you have it. So I reached out to the only person who might actually care about exposing this. A mid-level investigative journalist named Grace Fenton, who had once covered corruption in municipal contracts. I sent her a single page memo with both Crane Brothers' signatures and a date stamp. Within an hour, she called me back, whispering as if someone was listening. "Where did you get this?" "This is dynamite." I told her the bare minimum: man, suitcase, river, documents. She wanted to meet in person. We picked a quiet diner off the highway at 11 p.m. I arrived early, sat in the back booth, watching the parking lot through the rain-streaked window. When she walked in, she wasn't alone. A tall man in a dark coat followed her in, scanned the room, then sat 2 booths behind her, pretending to read a menu. Grace slid into my booth and kept her voice low. "You don't understand. This isn't just money laundering. There are defense contracts buried in here. If this goes public, it's not just Crane who burns. The governor's office, the oversight committee, they'll all fall. She sipped her coffee without looking at me. And you're the only name they can afford to lose. I asked her if she could publish without exposing me. She shook her head. Not without more. Not without proof that you're not involved. That's when I told her about the car. The break-ins. The frozen bank account. Her face tightened. They're already moving. You have days at best. We parted without touching. She left first. I waited 10 minutes before going out, but when I reached the parking lot, my tires were slashed. I called a cab and went straight to the storage locker. The padlock was gone. Inside, the encrypted drive was still there, but the bag of original documents was missing. Whoever was watching me had let me know. We can take anything at any time. Back in my apartment, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single photo of me at the diner with Grace, time-stamped. No words, no threats, just proof they were one step ahead. I stared at that photo until sunrise. They thought I'd panic, run, maybe even destroy what I had left. Instead, I made my move. At 8 a.m., I called a lawyer, a quiet, meticulous man named Victor Reeve who specialized in whistleblower cases. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, then said, "First, we secure you. Then we secure the evidence. Only then do we talk to anyone." He gave me a burner phone, new IDs, and instructions not to go back to my apartment. He also told me to stop contacting Grace directly. If she's clean, she'll still be there when this breaks. If she's not... He didn't finish the sentence. That night, I checked into a motel under a false name. I wrote my statement by hand, 23 pages, and signed each page. Victor sent it to a federal investigator he trusted. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was one step ahead. Until my phone buzzed again at 3:14 a.m., a text from an unknown number. "You have something that isn't yours. Last chance." Underneath was a photo of my sister's house. The game had just changed. I didn't even breathe for a full minute when I saw that photo of my sister's house. My mind was already racing through contingencies. She lived 2 hours away, had nothing to do with any of this, and yet they knew how to reach her. That wasn't a warning. It was a promise. I called Victor immediately, woke him up. He didn't sound surprised. "I told you they would escalate." "We move now," he said. "Send me the photo. Then pack what you can carry. You're not going back there." I sent it and deleted the message from my phone. Victor arranged a safe house through one of his contacts in witness security. A windowless apartment in an old converted warehouse by the docks. By noon I was inside, curtains drawn, burner phone on the table, suitcase with my remaining copies under the bed. I sat in the dark listening to the distant clang of ships unloading containers, wondering how my life had become unrecognizable in less than a month. Victor arrived later, with 2 people, an IT forensics expert named Nadia and a former federal auditor named Blake. They moved like people who had done this before, no small talk, no hesitation. Nadia took my burner phone, my laptop, even the hard drive of my home PC that Victor had quietly retrieved. She began making multiple encrypted backups. Blake laid out a series of manila folders on the table. "This is what they're building against you," he said. Inside were copies of documents from the suitcase, but altered, arranged to show me authorizing transfers, signing approvals, even corresponding with Arthur Crane's office. Perfect fakes, but fakes that would stand up to a casual investigation. "You're their firewall," Blake said quietly. "If the fire reaches them, it burns through you first." That night we worked through a plan. Victor wanted to push everything to a trusted federal prosecutor out of state, bypassing local authorities entirely. "Locals compromised," he said. "Half of them owe Crane's brother favors. We go federal and we go clean." We scheduled a meet 3 days later in D.C., but we knew the window was closing. Each day more of my accounts were frozen. More anonymous tips appeared online painting me as a rogue accountant who had stolen and leaked confidential data. My name was already trending with words like fraud and embezzlement. On the second night in the safe house at 2:09 a.m., someone pounded on the door. 3 heavy knocks, then silence. Victor motioned for me to stay quiet. He checked the peephole. No one. When we opened it an hour later, there was a brown envelope on the ground. Inside, a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "You don't understand." "Look deeper." Victor scanned it first. It contained raw video footage from what looked like a municipal storage room. Crane's brother and 3 other men counting cash, laughing, signing off on fake invoices. One of the men was a state senator. Another was Thomas Brand, the oversight chief. The timestamp on the footage matched the exact date of one of the forged transfers with my name on it. We now had a bomb. If this footage was authentic, it could blow up the entire network and clear my name. But Victor was cautious. You release this without context, you disappear. We build a corridor first, multiple copies, multiple outlets. You don't hold the bomb, you scatter it. Nadia created encrypted bundles, each with a different part of the evidence, stored them in cloud accounts under random names, and scheduled them to auto-send if she didn't log in within 48 hours. By day 3, my sister had been moved to a friend's house under Victor's protection. I hadn't called her. It was safer if she hated me, but even in hiding, the pressure grew. My old colleagues started calling, leaving voicemails full of threats and pleas. Hand it back. You're ruining everything. We can make this go away. Even Evan called again, whispering that people were asking questions about him too. Whatever you do, he said, don't meet anyone alone. The morning we were supposed to drive to D.C., Victor got a text from his contact. Postponed. Unsafe. No explanation. Blake swore under his breath. They've reached out. Someone in the chain's dirty. We couldn't trust the official route anymore. That's when Victor laid out Plan B, go public in one hit. We dump it all, he said. All at once. Documents, video signatures, timestamps. Multiple journalists, multiple platforms, 1-hour window. They can't silence everyone, I hesitated. If we do that, they'll come for me directly. They already are, Victor said. The only difference is whether you're alone or whether the world's watching. So we prepared. Nadia wrote a detailed explainer with footnotes and links to the raw files. Blake cross-checked every transaction with public records, building a timeline of how the Crane brothers funneled tens of millions through dummy environmental projects. We included the offshore trust data, the Belize accounts, the names of every official who signed off. We packaged it like an indictment, not a leak. By midnight, it was ready. We scheduled the upload for 6 a.m. At 5:11 a.m., the power went out in the safe house. Total darkness. I heard the sound of boots on the stairwell. Victor whispered, "Stay behind me." Nadia grabbed the burner phone and hit the emergency send command. Somewhere in the world, servers began to push our evidence to a dozen journalists at once. The door burst open. Black shapes filled the room, shouting. Someone grabbed me, zip-tied my wrists, a hood over my head. The last thing I heard before they dragged me out was Victor's voice, steady and calm. It's done. When they pulled the hood off, I was in a windowless van. My heart was hammering, but I forced myself to breathe slow, to remember Victor's mantra, facts, dates, documents. No panic, no tears. They wanted me to crack. They didn't know I had already set the fuse. They drove for what felt like hours, though later I realized it had been less than 20 minutes. No one spoke. I could hear the tires change texture as the van left paved roads for something rougher, like gravel. Finally, it stopped. They yanked me out and marched me into what smelled like an abandoned warehouse and all oil, damp concrete, rust. They cut the zip ties but left the hood on. A male voice, calm but clipped, spoke from somewhere in front of me. "Mr. Hale, you've caused a great deal of trouble for people you don't understand. That ends tonight." I felt the hood being pulled off and blinked under a single hanging bulb. 3 men in plain clothes stood there. One I recognized immediately from the footage, Thomas Brand. His hair was perfectly combed, his suit pressed like this was just another board meeting. He stepped closer, holding a slim folder. "We don't have to ruin you. Give us everything and you'll walk away. New identity, clean slate, no charges." He slid a photo across the table. My sister again, this time getting into a car. "Or we start collecting what you care about." I didn't speak. Instead, I asked a single question. Why me? Brand smiled like a teacher indulging a slow student. "Because you were perfect. You left before the real money moved. Your signature was already on file. You were a ghost, Mr. Hale, a convenient ghost. And then you got curious. They wanted me to fold. But I had one last card. I didn't have the evidence anymore. By the time they dragged me out of the safe house, Nadia's emergency send had already triggered. Every major outlet in the country now had copies of the files, the footage, the timeline. I said nothing and watched Brand's phone vibrate on the table. He ignored it at first. Then it vibrated again, and again. He picked it up, frowned, and left the room. Through the thin walls I heard muffled voices. "It's everywhere." "No, all of it." Another man cursed. The third man glanced at me, eyes narrowed, then slipped out. Minutes later, Brand returned, his composure cracked. "What did you do?" he hissed. "Where is it?" I kept my voice level. "Gone, sent, it's not mine anymore." For the first time, he looked unsure. He leaned closer. "You think this saves you? You're a part of it now." I held his stare. "No, I'm the witness now. They left me alone in the room." My hands were still free. I looked around. Metal shelves, old pallets, a door on the far side slightly ajar. I could see daylight seeping through. They hadn't even locked it, maybe thinking I was too scared to move. But Victor had drilled it into me. Move when they're distracted. I slipped off the chair and crept to the door. Outside was a loading dock facing a drainage canal. A rusted ladder led down to the water. In the distance, sirens wailed, faint but getting closer. I climbed down and waded through the shallow water under the dock, the smell of diesel and river mud choking me. Crawling on my hands and knees, I made it to a culvert that ran beneath the road. On the other side was a strip of reeds, and beyond that, a chain-link fence. I cut my hands squeezing through, but didn't stop until I was half a mile away, ducking into a stand of trees. From there, I could see the warehouse. Unmarked black SUVs were pulling out fast, heading opposite the sound of sirens. Someone had called them off. Someone else had called the police. I stumbled onto a side road and flagged down a passing delivery truck. The driver stared at me, soaked, bleeding, half-crazed, but let me ride in the back. As we drove away, I pulled out the burner phone. It was still in my pocket, still on. On the screen were 50 notifications from news alerts, social feeds, encrypted emails. Headlines blazed. Crane Brothers under federal investigation. Explosive. Documents link. Governor candidate to laundering. Scheme. Exclusive footage raises questions over state contracts. My name appeared too, but now as source not suspect. Victor's plan had worked. The fuse had gone off. By the time I reached the safe house's second location, there were already statements from federal prosecutors, promises of subpoenas, and a temporary restraining order protecting me as a cooperating witness. The bank freeze on my account was lifted. My sister was under protection. And for the first time in weeks, the car outside my window was gone. But it wasn't victory. It was just the start of a war fought in daylight instead of shadows. Crane's Brothers' campaign imploded overnight, but the network behind him didn't vanish. Anonymous threats still arrived. Voicemails, dark emails, photos of places I'd been. The difference now was that I wasn't alone. Victor, Nadia, and Blake had secured legal counsel, federal backing, and a media shield. Every time someone tried to smear me, another outlet published another piece of evidence. I stayed off social media, stayed in motels, moved every 2 nights. I testified in a sealed session before a grand jury. My statement was now a matter of public record. Brand resigned. A senator announced health reasons and disappeared. Crane himself was subpoenaed. Offshore accounts were frozen. Millions seized. But the machine kept grinding, looking for scapegoats. New faces to swap in where mine had been. Late one night, sitting in another anonymous motel room with a view of a neon sign buzzing in the dark, I realized something. I had pulled a suitcase from the river, but what I'd really pulled out was a lifetime of other people's secrets, all weighted down and ready to sink, and I'd surfaced with them attached to me. There would be no going back to anonymity. Not for me, not for my sister, not for anyone whose name had been in those files. I turned the burner phone off and stared at the ceiling. In the distance, freight trains moved slowly, their horns echoing. Victor had told me once, "Revenge isn't always about striking back. Sometimes it's about surviving long enough for the truth to strike for you." I wasn't sure yet which one I was living. For weeks after the publication, my life existed in 2 parallel timelines. In one, the official one, I was now protected federal witness 20204, a cooperating source under the Whistleblower Protection Act, with a case file thicker than my old resume. In the other, the unofficial one, I was still the man who had pulled a dripping suitcase out of a gray river and brought a machine's wrath down on his own head. Even as the headlines rolled on, governor candidate, withdraws from race amid scandal, I kept waking at 3 a.m. convinced someone was standing at the foot of my bed. Victor's team rotated me through safe apartments like clockwork. Nadia handed me new burner phones as easily as cigarettes. Blake drafted affidavits and quietly passed them to contacts in the Inspector General's office. My sister, who at first had refused to speak to me out of fear, now sent one-line texts. Still safe. Kids okay? Call went over. Each one both a relief and a knife. And yet in public the tide was turning. The Crane brothers' empire began to buckle. Local news helicopters hovered over their estate as movers carried out boxes of shredded paper. Subpoenas blossomed like weeds. One by one, names from the documents surfaced on indictments. Brand disappeared into a private retreat in Europe. Anonymous staffers came forward corroborating the footage. What had seemed like an untouchable fortress was now bleeding from 1,000 cuts. But the network was deeper than we'd thought. Offshore trustees filed injunctions to block the evidence. A PAC aligned with the governor candidate launched a smear campaign suggesting I had fabricated everything to extort my former employer. Old photos of me at company parties surfaced on hostile blogs, captions like "architect of fraud" splashed across them. I became a symbol, not a person. Whistleblower, traitor, hero, thief, depending on who you asked. Through it all, Victor kept me focused. Paper, dates, signatures, he repeated like a mantra. Don't engage. Let the facts crush them. He was right. Each time a smear hit, Nadia dropped another tranche of authenticated records to journalists who were now coordinating like a swarm. What had started as a single leak was now a slow-motion detonation, impossible to contain. Still, the personal cost mounted. I couldn't go back to my apartment. It had been raided and sealed. My bank cards were reissued under federal supervision. Even walking down a street in a hooded sweatshirt, I felt eyes on me. The knowledge that I had exposed a machine that had fed on public funds for decades was both intoxicating and suffocating. Then, one morning, an email arrived on the secure line from an address I didn't recognize. No subject, just a PDF attachment. Victor opened it on a clean laptop. It was a scan of a handwritten letter on government stationery. 3 short sentences. You don't know me. I was AB. They'll come for me next. Tell the truth. And a signature I couldn't read. Alistair Bisoy, the ghost in the documents, had reached out. Nadia traced the IP, a public library 2 states over. By the time we sent someone there, the security cameras showed only a man in a ball cap leaving through a side door. But inside the envelope he'd left on the library counter were yet more records. Internal memos from the Oversight Committee, proving that even federal monitors had been compromised. This was the missing piece Victor had been waiting for. This isn't just a state case anymore, he said. This is RICO. This is federal racketeering. Blake began drafting a new master affidavit tying the memos to the footage, to the offshore transfers, to the signatures, to the shell accounts. We were no longer playing defense. We were assembling an indictment that would land like a hammer. While the lawyers worked, I sat in a rented room in another nameless town, looking at my reflection in a cracked bathroom mirror. My face had changed, leaner, eyes darker. I was no longer the analyst who had just wanted a quiet life. I had become a witness, a threat, a living piece of evidence. And yet, even as the case gained momentum, even as prosecutors scheduled hearings and sealed indictments, the text kept coming from unknown numbers. Photos of places I'd been that day, of the safe house door, of Victor's car. Always the same message. Last chance. It was a different kind of war now. Fought in subpoenas and news cycles instead of back alleys. But the stakes were still lethal. I understood what Victor had meant. Revenge in my world didn't look like vengeance. It looked like daylight, like documents, like staying alive long enough for the truth to take root. On the night before my first public testimony, I sat at the kitchen table of the safe house with Nadia and Blake, the 3 of us eating takeout in silence. Outside, rain drummed on the metal roof. Victor stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He hung up and turned to me. Tomorrow they're going to try to paint you as a thief, a liar, an opportunist. Don't answer with outrage. Answer with facts. I nodded, staring at my hands. They were steady now, not shaking like the first day. Somewhere out there, Alistair B. was running. Somewhere, the men from the warehouse were plotting their next move. But tomorrow, under oath, I would tell exactly what had happened from the bridge to the suitcase to the forged signatures. and the world would have to decide whether it wanted to keep looking away. The morning of the testimony began before sunrise. A pair of unmarked cars picked me up at the safe house and drove in a convoy toward the federal courthouse, their headlights cutting through the mist. Inside, I sat between Victor and a young marshal with a blank expression, feeling the hum of the engine under my feet. It was the first time in months I had been in public without a hood or a disguise. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. They weren't there for me, they were there for the story. Whistleblower accountant testifies in Crane case had become a national headline overnight. In the holding room, Victor adjusted my tie like a father, his voice low, slow, precise. Every number you cite, every date you recall, say it like you're reading an invoice. Don't give them emotion. Give them receipts. Blake entered with a stack of exhibits. Nadia, who wasn't allowed inside, pressed a flash drive into Victor's palm before stepping back. I could see the worry in her eyes, but also something else. Resolve. When they called me in, the chamber was full prosecutors at one table, defense lawyers at another, journalists and sketch artists lining the benches. At the far end, behind his attorneys, sat Arthur Crane himself, older and heavier than I remembered, but still exuding that boardroom calm. His brother's seat was empty. He was under house arrest, awaiting his own hearing. Thomas Brand was there too, jaw tight, whispering to his lawyer. I raised my right hand, swore the oath, and sat. The questioning began immediately. The prosecutor guided me through the basics, my employment history, my resignation date, the day at the river. I recited the timeline like a script, each detail anchored to a document or a timestamp. They projected scanned pages from the suitcase onto a screen, my forged signature next to real ones. Did you authorize these transfers? No. Did you sign this memo? No. Did you have any knowledge of this offshore trust? No. Then the defense had its turn. Their lead attorney, a silver-haired man with a soft voice, tried to weave a narrative. Disgruntled ex-employee steals confidential data to extort his former employer, plants evidence, fabricates stories. I answered calmly, never looking away. The evidence you're showing was provided to me in a suitcase thrown into a river. Laughter rippled in the gallery. The attorney smirked. And you expect this court to believe that? I met his eyes. The footage we submitted this morning shows Mr. Brand and Mr. Crane authorizing cash transfers on the same date these documents were created. It's time-stamped and geolocated. The smirk vanished. Over 6 hours I spoke, not as a victim but as a witness. Dates, account numbers, routing codes, shell company names, offshore trusts. Each answer corroborated by Nadia's exhibits, by Blake's affidavits, by the USB drive Alistair B. had risked his life to send. The defense tried to object, to stall, but the judge overruled them again and again. By the time I stepped down, the room was a different temperature, no longer skepticism, but the cold recognition of a case shifting under their feet. Outside, the courthouse steps were a blizzard of cameras and microphones. Marshals shielded me as we moved to the car. Shouts followed, "Are you afraid? Did Crane threaten your family? Will you testify again?" I said nothing, just kept walking, the sound of shutters clicking like rain. In the car, Victor exhaled slowly. "You did it. You're on the record now. They can't unring that bell." That night we returned to yet another safe apartment. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the city lights through the blinds. News alerts popped on my burner phone. Whistleblowers' explosive testimony links Crane brothers to multi-state fraud. Federal prosecutors file new charges. The story had grown beyond me now. It was about contracts, elections, even national security. But the backlash came just as fast. Anonymous videos appeared online accusing me of being a government plant. Old coworkers gave interviews hinting at mental instability. A tabloid printed a photo of my sister's house under the headline, "Family of Suitcase, Man Under Guard." The harassment wasn't over. It had just changed shape. Victor gathered us around the table. "They're going to keep trying to frame you," he said. "But each day the case stands, each day more indictments drop, your position strengthens." Blake spread out a new set of papers. Sealed indictments for 3 more officials. A restraining order against one of the PACs harassing me, and a notice that my whistleblower status had been upgraded to full federal witness protection. Even so, sleep didn't come. I kept replaying the moment on the bridge, the splash of the suitcase hitting the water, the choice to follow the current. I thought about Alistair B., about Nadia's auto sins, about the men in the warehouse who had let me glimpse their faces. This was no longer about surviving long enough for the truth to strike. It was about living in the open with the knowledge that the truth had already struck, and it had hit like a hammer. The next morning, before dawn, Victor handed me a passport under a new name and a one-way ticket. "You need to disappear for a while," he said. "Let the case breathe. You've done your part." I looked at the passport, then at him. "And then what?" Victor's eyes were tired but steady. "Then you decide who you're going to be when you're no longer a ghost." I packed my single bag in silence, walked out into the pale light, and felt the weight of months lift slightly from my shoulders. Somewhere behind me, the machine I had dragged into daylight was still grinding, still trying to close its wounds. But for the first time since that morning on the bridge, I felt like I was no longer drowning with it. The plane took off just after sunrise, a thin orange line splitting the horizon as the city shrank beneath the clouds. For the first hour, I couldn't look away from the window. Every minute of altitude felt like distance from the noise, the headlines, the sleepless nights. Victor had booked the seat under a name that didn't feel like mine, Daniel Roan. It sounded too clean, too untouched. I wondered how long I'd have to wear it. The flight attendant offered coffee, and for the first time in months I took it without checking the lid, without looking over my shoulder. They'd sent me to a quiet coastal town on the opposite side of the country, population under 10,000, mostly fishermen and retirees. The kind of place where no one asked questions and everyone waved. The federal contact who met me at the airport was a woman named Eliza Hart. She handed me a set of keys and a sealed envelope. "Your address, utilities, everything's under the program now. You're off the map." Her voice was professional but kind. "Don't contact anyone for 60 days. Not Victor, not your sister. Let the story move without you." The house was small, 2 rooms and a porch overlooking a salt marsh. I spent the first few days fixing what didn't need fixing. A leaky faucet, loose hinges, the fence gate. My hands needed something to do. At night I walked down to the dock, listening to the gulls and the creak of boats. The air smelled of salt and diesel and rain. For the first time in a long while, the only sound following me was the tide. But the quiet had an edge to it. Every evening I'd check the news on the burner phone I wasn't supposed to use. The Crane brothers were still in custody, their lawyers arguing for bail. More names surfaced: senators, lobbyists, auditors. Brandt had cut a deal and was testifying in exchange for immunity. The headlines called it the largest municipal fraud case in state history. My testimony had become the centerpiece, cited in every article, replayed on every late-night commentary. I'd gone from ghost to symbol, and symbols don't get to rest. One night, maybe 3 weeks in, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside the porch. Not the cautious kind, measured, confident. I stayed still, the lights off. A shadow moved past the window, then a soft knock. 3 times. I reached for the small pistol the marshals had left in the kitchen drawer. "Mr. Hale," a voice called quietly. "It's me, don't shoot, Victor." I opened the door. He looked older, thinner. His tie loosened, a bruise darkening under one eye. "They hit the office," he said before I could speak. 2 nights ago. Someone leaked our location. Nadia's fine, Blake's missing. I felt the cold rush through me again. "The files?" "Secure," he said. "But they're trying to discredit the federal angle now. They've got judges in their pocket, trying to reframe it as political interference. They're desperate." He dropped a thick folder on the table. "You need to see this." Inside were new documents, recent wire transfers dated after the investigation had begun. The network wasn't dead. It had simply shed its skin. "They're moving the remaining funds out of the country," Victor said, "through a charity in Belize under a new name. And guess whose digital authorization they used again?" I stared at the pages. My forged signature resurrected like a ghost. "They're still using me," I said quietly. "Still making me their firewall." Victor nodded. "Which means you're still their weak point. They can't erase you while you're quiet. They need you framed again. Just enough doubt to survive the storm." I sat down, the wooden chair creaking under my weight. The porch light flickered with the wind. "So what do we do?" I asked. Victor rubbed his temples. "We don't go back to the system. We leak it straight to the public this time. No middleman, no journalist to spin it. Raw documents, timestamps, direct uploads. Let them drown in their own data." I stared at him. "If we do that, we'll be targets again." He gave a faint, weary smile. "We already are." We worked through the night. Victor's laptop connected to a secure satellite link. He'd already copied the new batch from an inside source, a whistleblower within the Department of Finance itself. Someone following in my footsteps. We verified each transfer, traced each account, logged each IP. By dawn, the data was ready. Once I hit upload, it's out there forever, Victor said. No court, no injunction, no cleanup crew can stop it. I hesitated. Do it. He pressed enter. The screen blinked, the progress bar crawled, and then it was done. A quiet click. A ripple through the dark web, through news feeds, through encrypted forums. Within minutes, the leaks hit the surface. Another wave of documents. Another scandal. Another hammer strike. We sat in silence, listening to the gulls outside, the tide shifting under the dock. Victor finally spoke. You know, they'll make you the villain again. That's their only move left. I looked out toward the water. Then I'll let them. Villains get remembered. By afternoon, every news outlet was flooded with the story. The Crane network wasn't dead, it had metastasized. But now, for the first time, the entire skeleton was visible. Offshore foundations, complicit banks, falsified audits, even traces of federal interference. And at the center of every diagram, my name. The man who pulled the suitcase from the river. That night, the marshals returned for Victor. They'll question him, Eliza said after he was gone. He knew too much. But the system's turning now. You might actually be safe. She paused before leaving. You didn't just blow the whistle, Mr. Hale. You cracked the dam. When the door closed, I stood on the porch, the sky a deep violet above the marsh. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint hum of a cargo ship leaving port. Engines low and steady. The air smelled like rain again. I thought of that first splash, the man on the bridge, the cold weight of the suitcase in my hands. Every choice since had been a current, pulling me forward whether I wanted it or not. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was steering. By the end of that week, the world had changed again, but not in the way I expected. The leak had gone nuclear. Major outlets couldn't print fast enough. Overnight, senators were resigning. Banks were freezing assets. Entire boards were stepping down. The Crane brothers' empire didn't just collapse, it detonated. But along with it came chaos. Markets dipped, contracts froze, and the political fallout spread like a virus. My name, my real name, was everywhere again. And this time, no one could agree on what I was. To some, I was the man who exposed one of the biggest financial conspiracies in modern history. To others, I was the arsonist who burned down the system to save himself. Federal agents visited the house 3 days after the upload. Eliza was with them. You'll have to move again, she said, her tone softer now. Your location's compromised, but we're increasing your clearance level. You're under direct protection now. I wanted to ask where Victor was, but I didn't need to. Her silence told me enough. They moved me at night another safe house, this one inland, surrounded by pine woods and silence. The drive was long, the road empty. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying everything. The splash of the suitcase, the flicker of the USB upload bar, the weight of being both victim and trigger. When we finally stopped, the air smelled like wet soil and pine resin. The cabin was small but fortified, stocked with food, water, and a single radio. I was told to stay put, no contact until further notice. Days blurred. I chopped wood, wrote notes I couldn't send, walked the trails when the fog lifted. Every so often I'd pick up faint radio chatter about arrests, hearings, fallout. Crane's brother had turned on him, offering a plea in exchange for protection. Brand had been found dead in what was called a car accident. Another senator was under investigation for obstruction. The entire structure was eating itself alive. Then one evening I found an envelope slipped under the cabin door. No return address, no markings, just my name written in careful black ink. Inside a single sheet, a printout of a news article. Headline: Federal Witness Missing Amid Ongoing Corruption Probe. Under it, my photograph. They'd declared me missing, officially. Which meant my identity was erased again, but this time not for protection, for erasure. My first instinct was to call Eliza, but the radio line stayed dead. I checked outside, no tire marks, no footprints, just the endless still of the forest. But when I went to the window, I saw it. A faint orange glow through the trees, far enough to be safe, close enough to see the flicker of firelight. Someone else was out there. I grabbed the pistol from the drawer and stepped onto the porch, listening. The night was too quiet, no crickets, no wind, just that low crackle of fire. I walked through the woods, my boots sinking into damp leaves, each step louder than it should have been. The glow grew brighter until I reached a small clearing. There, burning in a metal barrel, were papers. Wet, half-charred papers. And beside it, a man in a heavy coat back turned to me. He wasn't armed. He didn't move until I spoke. "Who are you?" He turned slowly. It was Blake. His face hollowed out, beard grown, eyes red. "You're alive," he said hoarsely. I wasn't sure. I lowered the gun. "Victor said you disappeared." "I did," he said, tossing another handful of papers into the fire. "They came for me the night after the upload. Took everything drives backups. I ran before they could make it look like suicide." I stepped closer, watching the pages curl and blacken. "What is that?" "Copies," he said. "The last batch Victor made before—" He stopped, looking into the flames. He knew it wouldn't stop with one leak. He said there'd be another layer: international accounts, off-ledger trades, political donations. Everything we've exposed was just the state level. He looked up at me, his voice breaking. "The next layer starts with defense contracts. And it's bigger than anything we imagined." We stood there in silence, the fire reflecting in both our eyes. "Then why are you burning it?" I asked. "Because they're already hunting for it. And for anyone tied to it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. "This is all that's left." He pressed it into my hand. "Get it to someone who can finish it. Nadia, maybe. Or Grace, if she's still alive." Before I could respond, a sound split the air, distant, low, mechanical. Helicopter blades. Searchlights flickered through the trees. Blake turned toward the sound. "Go," he hissed. "They can't find us together." I started to protest, but he was already running toward the fire, scattering papers into the air like ash. The light swept closer, the roar overhead deafening. I dropped low, crawling through the brush, clutching the drive. The forest filled with shouting, flashlights, the sharp crack of gunfire. I didn't look back until I was half a mile away. When I did, I saw the glow of the fire spread wider, catching the trees. I ran until dawn, until my legs gave out and my lungs burned. When the light finally broke through the canopy, I found an old ranger station by a dried-up creek. Inside, a dead phone line, dust, and a working generator. I plugged in my laptop and opened the drive. It wasn't just numbers this time. It was video meetings, calls, entire presentations. Politicians, defense contractors, global executives. Contracts for weapons shipments disguised as infrastructure aid. Dates, amounts, signatures, all real, all traceable. It was the second layer. The real engine beneath everything. And Victor had been right. What I found in the suitcase was never just about money. It was about control. As I sat there, watching those faces on the flickering screen, I felt something shift. Fear, exhaustion, everything fell away. There was only clarity now. They thought they had buried me again. But I was still here. And this time I wasn't leaking anything. I was going to broadcast it myself. I started typing, building the upload packet from scratch. The generator hummed, the screen glowed. I could hear the wind outside rising through the trees. Somewhere behind me, the forest was still burning. I didn't care. I had one more flood to unleash. I stayed inside that abandoned ranger station for 2 days, barely eating, sleeping in 30-minute snatches while the generator groaned and the smell of gasoline mixed with pine needles. Every time I blinked, I saw Blake's face disappearing into the trees, the helicopter's light slicing the night, the flash drive burning like a coal in my palm. By the third dawn, my hands had stopped shaking. I had built a working network. A satellite uplink routed through 3 countries, a bank of temporary email addresses, and a schedule of releases that would detonate over a month, not an hour. This time there would be no single upload to intercept. This time it would cascade like falling dominoes. The files themselves were monstrous. Not just bank transfers or forged signatures, but internal PowerPoints with defense logos, shipping manifests, handwritten notes from cabinet members. Entire projects disguised as agriculture outreach were actually weapons depots. The money funneled through the Crane network had been seed capital for a much larger scheme. Contracts linking private security firms, offshore banks, and friendly politicians across 3 continents. It wasn't municipal fraud. It was state capture. I mapped every node by hand on brown craft paper torn from the walls of the station, drawing lines until my pen bled through. Names, dates, phone numbers. The deeper I went, the more I understood. The suitcase had been bait. I had been bait. Someone inside had needed a fall guy to force the second layer into the light. Maybe Alistair B., maybe Victor himself, maybe someone higher. And yet, in trying to frame me, they had given me everything. On the 3rd night, a knock came at the door, soft, deliberate. I picked up the pistol and waited. "It's Nadia," a voice whispered. I opened the door a crack. She was thinner, her clothes muddy, eyes sunken but alert. They raided the second safe house. Eliza's gone underground. Victor didn't make it. The words hit me like a hammer. She stepped inside and shut the door. He sent me here. Said you'd have it. I handed her the flash drive. This is it, I said. She plugged it into her own laptop without flinching. We can't trust journalists anymore, she said. Too many are compromised. We'll build our own channel, drop pieces into public ledgers, blockchain records, dead man servers. Let citizen analysts do the work. If one node is taken down, 10 more will mirror it. We worked in silence for hours. Outside, the wind howled like a freight train. Every few minutes, the radio hissed with garbled chatter. Agents searching, fire spreading, more resignations. By dawn, we had a prototype, a decentralized archive disguised as thousands of innocuous files seeded across the web. Each file contained a key to the next. A hydra of evidence, no single head to cut off. But we both knew what would happen when it went live. They won't stop with smears, Nadia said quietly. They'll come for blood. You're the face of this, and now I'm next to you. I looked at her across the flickering glow of the laptop screens. Then we finish it tonight. We set the timer for midnight. At 0001, the system would push the first tranche to a network of encrypted forums, leak sites, and public ledgers. At 0003, it would release the second. At 0005, the third. By dawn, millions of people would have fragments of the second layer. And if neither of us checked in within 24 hours, an automated package would send the master key to every major outlet in the country. Just before midnight, I stepped outside. The air was cold, filled with the smell of smoke from some distant fire. The sky was clear enough to see stars. I thought about my sister, about Victor, about the man on the bridge whose face I still couldn't recall clearly. I thought about the weight of that suitcase in my hands, how heavy it had been, how cold the water had felt. In pulling it from the river, I hadn't just saved evidence. I had dredged up an entire hidden world, and it had latched onto me like a parasite. Nadia came to stand beside me. When this is over, she said softly, what will you do? I stared at the horizon. If it ever ends, maybe disappear, maybe tell the story myself, maybe just stop running. Midnight ticked over on my watch. Inside, the laptops began to hum. Lines of code scrolled like a waterfall. The first wave went out, then the second, then the third. Somewhere, in 1,000 corners of the internet, pieces of the truth were blooming like spores. In the distance, I heard engines. Not a helicopter this time, but trucks, multiple. Their lights weaving between the trees. Nadia closed her laptop and slipped the final key into her pocket. They're here, she said. We have to move, but I didn't move. For the first time in months, I felt completely still. The truth was no longer mine to hold or protect. It was out there, unstoppable. Whatever happened next to me, to Nadia, to the others, it was already bigger than us. I turned back toward the door, grabbed my bag, and met her eyes. Let's finish this. And together we stepped off the porch into the darkness toward the approaching lights. We ran until the forest opened into a clearing lit by headlights. 3 black SUVs skidded to a stop, their doors flying open. Flashlights slashed through the mist, voices barking orders. Nadia darted right, disappearing into the trees. I dropped behind a fallen log, clutching the satchel that held the last physical copy of our data. A shout echoed, followed by a shot, then another. I couldn't see her anymore. The world narrowed to noise and breath and the hammering of my heart. I crawled toward the ridge, my boots slipping on wet moss. When I reached the top, I looked back. Figures in tactical gear swarming the ranger station, flames licking its roof. They were burning the evidence again. But this time it didn't matter. The system was already alive, distributing itself across the digital world faster than they could delete it. Every flash drive, every encrypted key, every mirrored packet now lived on thousands of devices in dozens of countries. One of the men shouted into a radio, "The upload's complete. It's everywhere." His voice cracked. I could almost hear the panic. That was when I stood up, hands raised, and let the flashlight find me. I was done running. I dropped the pistol, felt the mud soak through my jeans, and watched as they closed in. A pair of hands forced me to the ground, plastic cuffs biting into my wrists. They pushed my face into the earth, the smell of pine and smoke filling my lungs. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Somewhere far away, screens were lighting up. Files were opening. Headlines were forming. The truth was spreading like fire. They dragged me toward one of the SUVs. Inside, a man in a suit was waiting. He looked calm, polished, untouched by the chaos outside. He studied me for a long moment, then said, "You've destroyed something you'll never understand." I met his gaze. "Maybe," I said, "but now everyone else will." He turned away, signaling to the driver. The vehicle lurched forward, leaving the burning forest behind. Through the tinted glass, I could still see the orange glow fading in the distance, the last trace of the world I had lived in. And for the first time, I realized that revenge hadn't been about retribution. It had been about exposure, about turning their silence into noise. Weeks passed. I was processed, questioned, relocated again. But the damage was irreversible. The Crane brothers were in prison. 3 senators had resigned. The Department of Finance was under federal supervision. Every secret that had once drowned at the bottom of that river was now floating in plain sight. Nadia resurfaced months later under a new identity. She left a single line on a secure channel. It worked. I live quietly now. Different name, different coast, still checking over my shoulder out of habit. Sometimes I walk to the docks at night, watch the dark water move beneath the lights, and wonder if I'd still pull that suitcase out knowing everything that followed. Because in a way, the man who threw it in was right. It wasn't meant to be saved. It was meant to sink, taking the weight of corruption with it. But maybe the truth isn't supposed to stay buried. Maybe it needs someone reckless enough to drag it into the light, even if it costs everything. What do you think? If you'd seen that suitcase hit the water, would you have pulled it out too?